up, my dad, back in Joplin, Missouri, owned a building supply store. It had a huge two-story warehouse connected to it, and that warehouse was a beautiful place to store inanimate objects, but it was a terrible place to work because it was unheated, it was uncooled, it was full to the brim of hundreds, even thousands, I guess, of things. Every December, we had to take inventory. As a high school student, I was drafted to help my dad. This was decades before anybody dreamed of barcode scanners. This was a clipboard in a stubby number 2 pencil checking things off in this vast warehouse. The winter of 1969 was one of those Christmas time, end of the year period that I was drafted, and that unheated warehouse was miserable. I put on 2 pairs of everything and still remember my hand shaking and my other hand shaking holding the pencil, wandering in those dark stacks of insulation and building material, trying to figure out what matched what and checking it off. It was then I was determined, and I heard God calling me to preach. It's a true story. I wanted to avoid every kind of work that I could avoid. And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, we find the same thing. You have the text there in your worship folder, and you heard it from Betsy a few moments ago. So I want us to try and understand what's going on in this passage of 2 Thessalonians, what it might mean for us today. Now, Pastor Carey always does a great job in bringing the background of our biblical passages, and I want to do something similar today. So this passage is speaking to the house church in the Grecian city of Thessalonica. Now, most of our Bible stories are set in Jerusalem, right? Back in the Holy Land, and it's a place of Jewish religion, and it's an agricultural community primarily. When we moved to Thessalonica, a Greek city, we changed completely. This is an imperial Roman city. This is a city in which the largest temple is dedicated to the Roman god Zeus and so forth, and a giant statue of Caesar Augustus stood there in the marketplace. This was a port city, so it was a thriving city. It was also on the Via Egnatia, which was a massive Roman superhighway that ran from east to west so that traffic could move great amounts of goods and services. Thessalonica was a wealthy place. The economic status was clear. Thousands upon thousands of slaves were the bottom echelon. And then there were some small tenant farmers, we would say, people perhaps who would work, we would put in our language, the gig economy today. And then there were some who might own a little larger farm, or maybe they had a shop in the marketplace, they had an income. And then at the top were the Roman leaders, the wealthy landowners with massive estates, the shipping owners who brought the goods into the port. They were the oligarchs who owned the massive part of wealth, and everyone else was down at the bottom. That was Thessalonica as an economic status. And in that community came Paul and Silas and Timothy preaching about this Jewish rabbi who had come back to life. Well, they were received for a while, and then the Roman government began to listen because they were talking about a new kingdom coming. Do you think that might alert the Roman authorities that they needed to pay attention to this? Absolutely. And so just down the road a little bit in Philippi, you remember a story about some missionaries and what happened to them. Thrown in the jail, right? They finally escaped Philippi. They went about 40 miles down the road to Thessalonica, and then they started preaching the same thing. The Roman authorities began to take notice, but so did everyone else in the city. Those who weren't so enamored with the empire, those who were longing for something different, and Paul's message began to resonate, and a house church was formed, and people began to dream about how a God of love, a God of opportunity, a God of caring and compassion as revealed in Jesus might apply to their needs. But finally, the Roman authorities began to get a little too close, a little too hot on the trail, and so that group of missionaries had to leave town at night. You can read the stories in Acts 16 through 18 if you want to while I'm preaching, and it'll give you something to do. So Paul and those early preachers, they were received quite well, and they had an exciting message. Not only had Jesus come once, but Paul and the apostles believed it was not going to be long before he showed up again. And this time, as the great judge of the universe, as this time, the one who would inaugurate a kingdom for all. And there were some folks in Thessalonica, and this is where I want you to tune in. There were some folks in Thessalonica who got so excited about that they quit their jobs. Paul and Timothy and Silas had already left. They were headed towards Athens. And so the little church was there. They didn't have any Bible to read or anything. It was just what the apostles had left them. And the message was Jesus was coming back. And so they just got so excited they quit. They quit their trade. Some of the slaves ran away from their owners because they were promised a new kingdom. And the little church began to struggle. How do we support these people? They're just sitting there. They're talking about it, but they're not doing anything that would help the rest. What was Paul to do? Well, he writes 2 Thessalonians of what we have today. And he has a word for these young people, these excited believers, these who had decided that they could just sit around and wait for Jesus. Paul had a word for them, and we've read some of it. And Mike, if you'd turn back to that passage, we can see it again. Paul wanted something different to happen. You know, have people ever sat around and waited for Jesus to come in history? Well, you think, well, that's something that happened a long time ago. Not really. In 2011, some of you may remember this, a radio preacher in California named Harold Camping was preaching that Jesus was going to come back May 20th, 2011. And so many people believed his message that some of them sold their property, some of them quit their job, some of them moved to where he was, and they waited for that special day in May of 2011 when Jesus was going to come again. Well, Paul had a word for those people in Thessalonica, and he's got a word for us too. You ought to follow our example. He was talking about himself. And all of us know that Paul was a master leather worker. When he moved to Thessalonica, he set up shop. And he began in the marketplace to do his leather working duty. He might be repairing a sail that the sailors had brought in, or building a tent for someone who was going on a journey, or maybe he was making a new pair of shoes. He was active doing his work. And I think we can imagine what Paul's hands were like. Years of leather work. Can you imagine the muscles? Can you imagine the calluses? Can you see the stains on his hands? And can you feel how a lifetime of working with your hands would make them hurt with arthritis every night? That was Paul. And as he did that work, he would be talking with folks. He'd be talking with the slaves next to him. He'd be going down and visiting over a cup of coffee. Did they have coffee back then? I'm not sure. But over a cup of something about Jesus and his love. He would be sharing about that kingdom. And what he says to these Thessalonians is exactly what he wanted them to hear. He was saying to them, keep away from those believers who are idle and disruptive. We were not idle when we were with you. nor did we eat anyone's food without paying for it. We worked night and day, laboring and toiling, so we wouldn't be a burden. And he got down to the conclusion there in verse 10, as he says, if a man will not work, he shall not eat. A fundamental truth, I think, lays underneath this. And it's the deeper truth. What we've just read is Paul's admonition to one church in one place with one situation. But there's a deeper truth, and that's what I want us to focus on for us today. Paul is saying work is good. Work is honorable. Work helps us learn. Work is where God comes beside us and helps us to grow. Work is a sacred place where we're teammates with God in building a better world. I think that's what Paul was trying to say at the very bottom line. So what does it mean for us today? Does this, where he says, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat, does that mean we need to turn out everybody who's on Medicaid in America today, have them walk the streets looking for money? Does it mean for us today, ethically, that we should suspend all Social Security payments? My God, I hope not, because that's where I get my income. Or does it mean that we don't give children at school free lunches because they're not working? No, of course not. That's crazy ethics. And over the centuries, we've discovered that a culture that will take care of the children and take care of the elderly and provide for those who are disabled is going to be a culture that actually enriches its entire society with their lives. So what does this mean for us today? Well, before we get there, I want us to think about the difference in economics between Thessalonica and the modern world. Thessalonica was built on the labor of slaves, period. It was built on patriarchy. It was built on patronage, which Pastor Carey mentioned a couple of Sundays ago, which is where the rich people give a few good things to the poor people. The poor people give a lot of good things to the big, and that's how the reciprocal nature of patronage works. It was built on the massive military power of the Roman Empire. That was the economic situation in Thessalonica. I'm so grateful that we're in a different world today. We're in a capitalistic society where private ownership is all a part of what we have. It's a place where people can actually choose a job to work rather than just what their parents did. It's a place where we can band together in mighty organizations that lift everybody up, and the government doesn't keep us from doing that. But there are also some things that are kind of the same now as they were then. Taxes, that's one. Millions of people working to put a paycheck, to put beans on their table, that's another. Some things are the same. But could you imagine the Apostle Paul if he had found out about what we work with today? How about telling him about a 40-hour week? Wouldn't that be something? Or about disability income? Or what about farm supports? Or what about retirement funds that we can save for decades? All of these things that we kind of take for granted weren't a part of that life back then. Do you remember your first job? This is where I want you to get involved, not to answer out loud, but I want you to think. What was your first job? For some of you guys, it was throwing hay on the back of a truck during the summer. For some ladies, it might have been doing some babysitting. For a lot of people, it was working in fast food, right? You were the waitress or the fry cook or whatever it was back then. Maybe you were sacking groceries. Maybe some were summer interns for a little bit. My first job after I escaped the warehouse was to work in a television station. Yeah, I was a cameraman. Back then, cameras were this big. They were like small cars. And we wheeled them around the studio, and I would direct some programs and push the dials and switches. and earned an incredible $2.50 an hour. Yeah, it was big time back then. My soon-to-be fiance was a paid daycare worker. The man who would be the best man in my wedding, Howard, his mom worked at Sears. And so his job was to put on a Winnie the Pooh costume and wander around the store. Oh, Mike, who I played baseball with, bagged ice in an ice house, filling up 20-pound bags of ice and carrying them to the truck. I didn't want that kind of job. Carol, who was Jan's best friend, was a hospital volunteer. Work has its meaning. Work is valuable. And the entire Bible really teaches that work is worth following and doing. The Scriptures, in fact, teach that God is the ultimate worker. God is the creator, and that is work. God is the sustainer as divine energies permeate the entire universe, joining us and all creatures in a positive movement forward. That's God's energy working. Jesus was an example of a worker. In fact, he said to those disciples, we must work the works of him who sent me. David, the king, started out as a shepherd, right? Adam and Eve in that legendary garden started out as gardeners, right? Work is honored all across Scripture. And so we come to the fact that we should get real about how it can affect our work today. How does it affect? Well, think for a moment about Alexis. She works a sales job. There's a quota every month for her to do and earn. Every keystroke on her computer is tracked by the supervisor and recorded as to whether she's working or not. She didn't get a raise in January, so she had to get a second job as a waitress in order to pay the bills in her small apartment and her life. The owner of the business, a billionaire, spent $100 million on his yacht. For Alexis, work stinks. What about Jill? Jill's in her 22nd year as the nursing supervisor of a senior adult care facility. She cannot keep good workers at all. She thinks about it every day, trying to build the best team. Her teenage kids are rowdy at home more than she could almost handle. Sunday night, she gets depressed because she's got to go to work the next morning. And for Jill, work stinks. What about Hector? Hector was laid off earlier in the year. Technical job. He was really skilled, but they didn't need him anymore. He managed to scrape together enough money to open his own little tech repair shop, and was doing a great business until a franchise business nearly the same moved in a couple of miles away. And then his imported parts doubled in cost. And last week he said to his wife, "We may not make it." Work stinks for Hector. I wonder if Paul's message could give a larger picture for us all. I wonder if Paul's message is not about the Scripture forcing people to go to work who are not able to do that. Maybe it's a declaration that what we're doing has a bigger value. It has more than just earning that paycheck. Maybe Paul was teaching that building the kingdom by working in the marketplace has a vital role in God's real kingdom. Maybe the main lesson is that our workplace can become a sacred place where we are teammates with God in building a better world. Now, those ancient busybodies in Thessalonica thought they were doing a great thing by just sitting back and not working at all. Paul comes in and says, "No, you're totally backwards. You're wrong. The real place where that is Honoring God is when you're there in your work and you're doing it with integrity and you're loving people around you and you are building a kingdom now because God is already present right now and we can join Him in this work. Wow. Here's something amazing. God is not just out there somewhere. God is here with us. In fact, God's energies are right now touching you. Your energies right now, God's energies are right now a part of you as you listen to this sermon. They're a part of me as I try to preach what's here. They're a part of our community out there in the larger world beyond these walls, 2/3 of whom are not in a church, 40% of whom are not even interested in being in a church. That's where God's at work. And the amazing thing is that according to the process and relational theology that I've gotten involved in, this God is pouring His energy into us, drawing us, luring us in a non-coercive way towards a better world and a better future. That's the God we are serving right now. So perhaps I would be guilty, forgive me, of being too idealistic if I would say to you that the greatest challenge is not showing up at the work site. The greatest challenge is not whether we love our work, but whether we love the sacredness of joining God in our work. There is the real heart of it. So let's come back to the title of the sermon. Have I answered what I set out to do? How do we avoid work? Well, I think the answer is we embrace the larger purposes and see that it's more than just what our hands may do, or as they type out something, or our mouth may speak, or our hands may hammer something. It is joining God in the incredible action of building this world together. Reframing our workplace as a sacred place where we're teammates with God in everything we do. Maybe for you, it is not working for a paycheck. Maybe it's raising a child at home to be that citizen. Or maybe it's helping a loved senior adult die with dignity in the last days of her life. Maybe it's speaking a word of inspiration to a student. Or maybe it's driving one of those huge combines as it cuts down that cotton and begins to bale it to clothe our world. Maybe it's your place to be with a young family, volunteering, maybe fixing a fence, preparing a meal at the food bank. Or how about volunteering at Second Baptist to do something? God is at work in all of this, and we can join God in doing it. Now, when I stood in that cold warehouse a good while ago, I'll have to admit, I didn't have any of these lofty things in my mind. But I believe God was preparing me for years of ministry as He has prepared you for what you're doing just now. And my friends were also being prepared for good things. That soon-to-be my fiance would become a 30-year educator, teacher of the year, would become the mother of 4, and do it all in heels and going backwards. Steve and Linda were a part of that group. They would become a pastor team, and they would raise 9 children. Wow. Carol, that hospital volunteer, would become a PhD neurological specialist, guiding people through the pain of their migraine headaches. Mike went from bagging ice in that refrigerator to a 40-year career as a Baptist student ministry director. And Howard, the best man in my wedding, would go from wearing a Winnie the Pooh costume to the uniform of a 4-star Air Force general briefing President Obama in the daily briefings. What God is doing today is not just today. It is a work that goes far beyond this day. How do we avoid work? Well, we reframe the larger purpose. We see that every moment we have becomes a sacred place where God might do something incredible around us. Will it be hard? I think it will. Paul had to say to them, don't grow weary in well-doing. Don't give up on doing what's right. But as you report at the work site, in the classroom, in the home place, down the street, at the church, you can be sure of one incredible thing. God is joining God's energy with you to do something that builds a better world and a better place for all of us. And we can say, God is going to help you when you pick up that pledge card today and join with the work we need to do. It's exciting to be a part of God's work. It's exciting to join God wherever the energies are. And in just a moment, Tim is going to lead us in a song, and you're invited to consider where you'll be in God's work. I want to be a part of a church that doesn't just make me feel good, but does good in this world. And I invite you to be a part of one too. You can come and visit with Josh as he stands here, or you could fill out a card and ask one of our pastors to give you a call, and they would love to sit down with you and explain what it means to be an excited member of a great church. And together, we'll make this next year the best we've ever had. So I invite you to stand with me and with Tim and the choir as we sing. And as you embrace the idea that God is going to be with you Monday morning as you report for work, and right now as you seek His will.